I think overall, I would say the Bully Boys detachment is probably the strongest of the new detachments in the Ork Codex. It just brings you some huge, enormous buffs, which we will cover in the next video. But if there is a second strongest detachment, for me, it's this one, the Dread Mob. This is your, it kind of fills two roles. It is your mech, stompy robot, death dread, mechanized list, but also it is probably the shootiest detachment in the book. So if you like bad moons, or you just want to put a load of mechanized, clanky robots on the table, then this is going to be the detachment for you. And that is because in no small part to the amazing combination of the main detachment rule and also the stratagems, they really do come together so unbelievably well to bring this really powerful set of rules to your units. The enhancements are okay, but I would say they are definitely the weakest part of this detachment. And so the unit that we're going to be looking today, the combo and the must-take unit that I think you need to bring if you are running this detachment, it is mainly focused, in fact it is completely focused on that detachment rule and the stratagems, because there is no attached character, so you won't be able to get any benefit from any of the enhancements anyway. And so first off, we have to see the main detachment rule. It is try that button, which we saw from the previews before the codex released, and it is just a super powerful and really quite hilarious rule that can either be really random, or you can add a bit more reliability to it, although that does also bring some inherent risks itself. The rule lets you roll a d6 whenever a mech, orc walker or grot vehicle unit is selected to shoot or fight, and in that phase you get a buff to the weapons based on the roll. So on a 1 to 2 you get sustained hits 1, a 3 to 4 gets you lethal hits, and then a 5 to 6 gets you 2 extra AP on your critical wound rolls. So they are all really good, really strong buffs, but they are random. And I think getting either sustained hits or lethal hits is probably where you're going to want to aim for and want to get. The extra AP is good, but because it only procs off those critical wounds, there is that extra layer of dice rolling to get to it. So if you could choose any of them, I think you would probably most of the time choose sustained hits or lethal hits. But the fact is that they are a random roll. You can, however, choose the option you want. But as I said, this comes at a price, because if you do choose which one you want, you have to give the weapons that you're using the hazardous rule, so you can potentially kill your models or cause some mortal wounds to them. And if your weapons already did have the hazardous rule, that now goes off on a 1 or a 2, so it is risky. And I personally think that all the buffs are good enough to warrant rolling it randomly most of the time, unless you really know that you need those sustained hits or those lethal hits in a particular situation. I would say you're probably safe most of the time to just randomly roll it. As I said, sustained and lethal hits are definitely the best of the three, but I do like the fact that each unit gets to roll when they shoot or fight individually. It does make this exceptionally customizable and usable, and if you have one unit that you know definitely needs lethal, you can just roll it randomly for everything else and just select lethal on them and only risk those hazardous rolls on that particular unit. So it is really flexible and customizable in terms of an army-wide rule. And whilst most stuff can make use out of this, because most of the stuff you're going to be bringing in this army is going to be a walker or a vehicle, or if it's an infantry unit, you can attach a mech to it, and then it becomes a mech unit, so you still get this buff. But the unit we're going to look at in this video is a unit that a lot of people have wanted to love for a long time. It's a really popular, cool model. They just always seem to be a little bit underpowered and perform not quite as well as they should do. And that is the somewhat unreliable but hilarious, massive, knight-sized Orky unit, which is the Morkanaut. The Morkanaut is the more shooty one, the Gorkanaut is the melee focused one, and it is still very good in this detachment. But personally, I think that the Morkanaut just benefits from a few extra things in terms of the stratagems and the army rule, or the detachment rule should I say. And as I said at the beginning, this detachment is, in general, I would say more of a shooty one than a melee one. So I think the Morkanaut just performs slightly better than the Gorkanaut when it's in the Dread Mob. At a base level, the Morkanaut hasn't changed. It still appears to be the fairly solid toughness 12, 20 wound monstrosity of a vehicle with that 3-up save and a 5-up invuln. So for 295 points, it can definitely do a lot of work and take a bit of a beating for its cost. And although I said it is the shooty version, it does have a passable melee profile. It's got either 4 strength 18 minus 3 AP 6 damage attacks, or it's got a sweep version to clear things like Marines, which gives it 12 attacks at strength 8 minus 1 AP and 2 damage. So it's definitely not the most amazing melee combatant out there, but with something like sustained hits from the Detachment Rule, this could quite reliably clear out a squad of 5 Marines that may be trying to bog it down fairly quickly. And so where the Morkanaut really does earn its keep in this detachment is its shooting. It does have quite a lot. Now, a lot of it is already hazardous, so you do potentially run a risk of causing yourself a few extra mortal wounds if you choose what buff you want, or with a couple of the stratagems that we'll talk about in a bit. So if you really wanted to choose sustained or lethal, for example, you would be risking those hazardous rolls on a 1 or a 2. But at a complete base level, this thing comes with a custom Mega Blaster, a custom Mega Zapper, 2 rocket launchers, and 2 twin big shooters. All in all, that is 3 strength 9 minus 2 AP D6 damage shots, D6 plus 3 strength 10 minus 2 AP D6 damage shots, 2d3 strength 9 minus 2 AP 3 damage shots, and then it's 6 strength 5 anti-infantry shots that also have rapid fire, so you can get a few more when you're in half range. So it is a lot of shooting, and then with the sustained or lethal, or even with the bonus AP on 6s, because you're going to be rolling so many dice, this can do a heck of a lot of work. It also gets some really nice bonuses in and of its own datasheet. You get +1 to hit rolls when you are shooting in a turn you've called a war, so you can get a good number of hits on the enemy unit even though you do have that base ballistic skill of 5+, and it is reasonably effective into infantry, hordes, elite units, as well as the light and medium vehicles, thanks to the sheer number of shots, but also thanks to that strength 9 and strength 10 shooting on the blaster and the zapper. It's not going to be one-shotting Imperial Knights or anything, just to be clear on that, but things like Terminators and Marines and Rhino tanks, and even, as we'll see in a bit, big 20-strong hordes of Gaunts, they will all take a lot of damage from this thing in a single turn. So just by itself, the Morkanaut with its own datasheet abilities and the detachment buff of sustained, lethal, or the bonus AP is really good. But what makes the Morkanaut especially good and worth taking in the Dread Mob is some of the stratagems that you can use alongside it, and there are 2 in particular which just bring the pain this thing can chuck out to a whole new level. And if you use both of them, which you can, the damage the Morkanaut can do is really, really scary for its cost. One of the strats we've already seen, we saw it in the preview, which is bigger shells for bigger gits. It grants your shooting +1 to wound monsters and vehicles, which is really nice with all the shooting it's got, but also you can choose to push it, and when you push all of these stratagems in this detachment, it gives you like an extra ability, but you also you have to take hazardous tests on the weapons, and again, if you already have the hazardous rule, you're going to be getting problems with that on a 1 or a 2. But if you decide to push this stratagem, not only do you get the +1 to wound, but also when you're targeting monsters and vehicles, you get +1 damage on all your shooting as well. So yes, as I said, you are risking some mortal wounds to yourself from hazardous, but it is going to be bumping your blaster and zapper up to D6 +1 damage, your rockets to 4 damage, even your twin big shooters, they're going to be going to 2 damage, so they are going to be a lot more effective into enemy monsters and vehicles now. It also of course means that you are going to be wounding things like knights on 4s rather than 5s, or things like rhinos and other T9 vehicles on either 3s rather than 4s, or even 2s rather than 3s with the Mega Zapper, so it can make quite a big difference. And alongside lethal or sustained hits from the Trident button, The Mega Blaster, for instance, goes from doing about 1.5 wounds to a knight in a Warg turn to doing double that and doing 3 damage to it. And that may not seem like much, but when you also factor in all the other shooting from the Mega Zapper, from the rockets, and even from the big shooter, you can look to be doing around 12 wounds into an Imperial Knight, or just flat out killing something like a Space Marine Gladiator tank in one volley. So it is some deceptively good shooting, especially when you look at the data sheet and you think I'm hitting on 5s, so I'm just not going to do that much at all. You can actually do a considerable amount of damage. But then it does get even better, because if you have another command point spare and you want to spend 2 CP on this thing, then what is, I would say, possibly the best strat in the game for the Morkanaut is what we have next, and that is Daka Daka Daka. And this gives you, if you just use the 1 CP, reroll hit rolls of 1. But again, you can push it, once again risking those hazardous tests, but if you push it, you get full rerolls to hit. And now, as I've said, the Morkanaut has a lot of shooting, and it's got some decent shooting, but it is always held back by being an orc, so it only hits on 5s, and even in the turn of a war, it only hits on 4s. So re-rolling all of your hit rolls, especially when you have that added benefit of fishing for criticals with lethal or sustained hits, it means all of those rerolls are going to give you so much more benefit and so much more opportunity to proc them. And I think in the case of lethal or sustained hits especially, pretty much all of your successful hit rolls are going to be a critical hit. What that means in practical terms is that instead of doing the nearly 12 wounds to a knight with just the original strat, with sustained hits from the Detachment Rule and both Daka 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 and bigger shells for bigger gits, and you push them both, you are now looking at doing around 20 damage into a knight. So with a little bit of luck, you can potentially one-shot an Imperial Knight with a Warg and 2 stratagems on the Morkanaut, which may sound like a fairly hefty investment, but remember, this is only 295 points, and it doesn't take much to get a full dead Imperial Knight from the shooting on this vehicle. Of course, if you aren't going into vehicles, or you don't want to use 2 stratagems, so you don't want to use the +1 to wound or the +1 damage, you know, if you're going into elite infantry or bikes or something else like that, just using Daka Daka Daka, that is still going to net you a ton of hits. And with just Daka Daka Daka, you are still quite likely to wipe out an entire 5-man Terminator squad really easily with the amount of shooting the Morkanaut can do. So if you are short of command points, you know, and you just have 1 stratagem to go for, you can decide if you want to go for a vehicle or a monster and maybe use the bigger shells for bigger gits, or if you aim at sort of infantry or anything that isn't a vehicle or monster, maybe go for Daka 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 instead and just try to wipe something out through sheer weight of fire. It just adds a withering hail of really strong anti-elite, anti-vehicle, and as I said earlier, anti-chaff firepower to the mix, because it does have a good number of shots. It's got some high strength shots, it's got some high damage shots, but on top of that, it also has a couple of guns, the Mega Zapper and the Rocket Launcher, which have blast. And so if you shoot into something like a squad of 20 Gaunts, you could potentially be getting D6 plus 7 Zapper shots and up to 2d3 plus 8 rocket shots, because you have 2 rocket launchers. So there is an insane amount of shooting that you can put into things like Gaunts and Guardsmen and even other Ork units. So you can feasibly wipe out an entire 20 strong squad in a single shooting phase, especially if you use something like Daka Daka Daka. Now, as I said, the Morkanaut can't be joined by any character units. It is a transport, so it can carry stuff, but they won't give it the benefit of any enhancements they have. So unfortunately, there is no enhancements that really make this even better. But just from a sheer detachment rule and the 2 stratagems you can use to really make it unbelievably powerful, the Morkanaut, I think, is a very, very, very strong pick for this detachment, because not only does it give you that really amazing shooting into a wide variety of targets, but it's also really nice because, as I said, the melee in it, it's not amazing, but it's fairly good, so it can also act as this threat moving up the board to charge stuff, or at the very least a bit of a counter charge unit, your enemy may not want to get close to some of your other stuff because they think, getting 4-6 damage attacks to the face might just kill their Primarch, or 12 strength 8 2 damage swings might just kill off their entire Marine squad. So it can do a decent job of, even though it's not really designed for it, acting as this melee threat to deter some enemy units getting too close. So that is the Morkanaut and the Dread Mob. As I said, I think it's probably the second best detachment, but certainly if you are running the Dread Mob, there are loads of good units you can bring, Looters and Death Dreads and Killicans, but I think the Morkanaut, especially when you combo it with some stratagem support, can just do a huge amount of damage and be this really big key centerpiece unit that can kill chaff, can kill vehicles, can kill elite units, and can also absorb a lot of firepower and can do okay in melee. It really can just do a little bit of everything, and it is well worth taking because of how well it combos with those two particular stratagems. But as always, I'd really love to know what you think. Will you be running a Morkanaut in your Dread Mob, or do you think there are other units that are worth taking over it? Maybe a unit of 6 Killicans, because I was tempted to do that as the example in this video, or even 10 Looters with a mech, because they can also do a hell of a lot of damage at their long range with the mech support and how that interacts with the detachment. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.